Do you believe in bloodbaths? Now let's check where this story came from, and what is legend and what is documented. Imagine this. Winter, 1610. On a cliff in the darkness of the Carpathians stands Cactus Castle, now in Slovakia. The snow is blackened by the smoke of torches, and in the courtyard, Habsburg soldiers' footsteps echo hollowly on the ice. They have not come to fight. They have come to enter the countess's bedroom. Inside, it is as quiet as a chapel after a service. The fireplace is smoldering. A dark, thick liquid has congealed in a wooden bucket. Elizabeth Bathory stands in front of the mirror, wrapped in a red woven cloak, as if it were her last argument against time. On the table are dried herbs, shards of crystal, and a spilled stain that looks like blood. Servants whisper that she kills girls to stay young. Chroniclers write that her skin glows even at 50. So what are we really looking at? Blood, or fear of a woman who ages more slowly than men? This is not a story about a monster. It is a story about how a woman was turned into a monster simply because she refused to disappear. In early modern Europe, female power was based on the youthfulness of the body. Elizabeth Bathory either turned her fear of aging into an alchemical ritual, or the world turned her fear into a myth convenient for politics. Snow in Chiette does not fall, it creaks. The guard walks slowly. Palatine Georgi Terzo knows that today it is not a sword that is needed, but a key. Inside, it smells of ashes and valerian, and the servants huddle against the walls. The door to the bedroom creaks like an old bone. The first minute on the other side of the threshold is silent. Elizabeth stands by a large mirror, not turning around. Her red cloak falls and folds like frozen waves. On the floor is a bucket of dark liquid that does not move at anyone's breath. On the table are herbs, crystal shards, a burnt spoon, a stain that will be called evidence outside. She was bathed in blood. This sentence is already circulating around the courtyard, even though no one has uttered it here yet. The myth needs only the right setting and the right pause. The clerk is already thinking about how to put the event into a formula. We are thinking about how to escape the fear that colors the scene. Because this winter, Europe is not looking for the truth, but for witches. In an hour, the castle will be sealed, the corridors counted. Someone will find the body, someone, the instruments, someone, the recipes for infusions. Everyone will see exactly what they feared. And in the meantime, winter, a mirror, and a woman who is in no hurry to grow old according to other people's rules. The end of 1610. Terzo enters, and with him comes a version of events that will live on for centuries. Imagine a childhood surrounded by swords. A fortress on the border between Hungary and Transylvania is no place for lullabies. The air smells of iron and sweat, and little Elizabeth Bathory learns to read not only letters, but also glances, orders, and the pauses of power. They say she was an amazingly beautiful child, dark-haired, with a cold gaze, and unusually intelligent. At an early age, she was already reading Latin, speaking German, and understanding Greek. For the 16th century, this was unthinkable for a girl. Her intelligence and beauty from childhood were part of her strength, and, perhaps, her curse. There are stories that at the age of 6, Elizabeth witnessed the execution of a peasant who was punished for theft. The snow turned red, and she did not look away. Chronicles say that this could have left a mark on her childhood memory. It is possible that this is when her sadistic tendencies, which would later be discussed in courts and legends, began. In a world where execution was a spectacle, cruelty simply became part of upbringing. Latin instead of lace. Strength is not a sin, but a legacy. The peasants whispered that she was mature beyond her years. Later chroniclers wrote about her youthful lovers, but there are no documents to prove it. Historians debate whether this was true or just another touch to the portrait of a sinner who was convenient to condemn retroactively. At 14, she knows that her body is a union of families. May 8, 1575, a wedding as loud as a battle. In the courtyard, there are trumpets, horses, wine poured on stone, the first sacrifice. Her husband, Ferenc Nadasti, is older, scarred by wars with the Ottomans. It is documented that on her wedding day, Elizabeth received from her husband the castle of Sejd and 17 villages around it. For a woman of the 16th century, this was unheard of power. His respect was without tenderness, but with recognition of strength. He was called Black Bay for his cruelty to enemies and iron discipline. In battle, he showed no mercy. Sometimes, servants said, this severity extended to the home. When the countess's words seemed too harsh, he would punish her as a subordinate. Historians debate whether this was jealousy or simply the norm in the 16th century, when even love was measured by power. When he was on campaign, she ruled taxes, disputes, estates. Her pen became sharper than a sword. And while other housewives led prayers, she kept accounts. When Ferenc Nadasti fought against the Ottomans, Elizabeth ruled his lands, collecting taxes, conducting trials, issuing orders. 6 children were born into their marriage, 4 of whom lived to adulthood. Elizabeth took care of herself with the same precision with which she kept accounts. Her chest contained ointments, infusions, powders, lists of herbs, and jewelry. Records of servants and inventories after her arrest show that she had her own means of care, dozens of bottles of tinctures, ointments, and decoctions. After giving birth, children were immediately handed over to wet nurses and governesses, as was the custom among women of her status at the time. Peasants said that the countess rarely took babies in her arms, preferring to watch mirrors rather than cradles. Some historians see this as coldness, others as simply a habit of the time, when tenderness was considered a weakness. 1601. Ferenc Nadasti suddenly falls ill. His legs give way, his voice weakens. The records contain only a brief, fell seriously ill, without explanation. A few months later, he can no longer stand on his own, and he is carried around in a chair like a wounded commander. No one knows whether this was the result of war injuries or poisoning. After his death in 1604, rumors spread that Elizabeth had helped her husband pass away more peacefully. There is no evidence, but a few words were enough to fuel the legend. She treated him herself. The servants whispered that the mistress received guests too often and did not mourn for too long. Historians debate whether these were really affairs or simply fear of a woman who enjoyed power without a husband. Neighbors whisper, Battery loves to give orders too much. But in a region where power is supposed to be male, a woman who signs documents herself already causes fear. The end of the 16th century. She is a mistress who cannot be ignored. And this is what will one day be called the first proof of her dark power. She sits in her laboratory, not in a tower, but in a cold room above the cellar. Copper flasks, glass bottles, herbs collected in the summer. The air smells of rosemary, mercury, vinegar, and dried blood. She notes down the proportions as if praying. Europe then believes that the world can be mixed in a flask. In every yard they are looking for living mercury. Monks are hunting for the philosopher's stone. For a man, this is science. For a woman, it is a sin. Rumors circulate in the castle that an old herbalist lives with her. They call her a witch. They say that she taught the countess to mix herbs and blood and whisper spells in Latin. At first, Elizabeth was feared for her severity and coldness. Then, for the fact that she did not age. When the first wrinkle appeared in the mirror, she allegedly turned to the witch for advice. And she whispered, The blood of the young is the best ointment against time. Thus was born the myth of bloodbaths, and with it, the legend of a woman who feared not death, but aging. When the maid disappears, rumors spread faster than mold. She drinks blood. She seeks eternal youth. But the truth is simple. She was only looking for a formula that the world allowed only men to seek. Night. She at castle is asleep. A rumble at the gates. Torches. Hooves. It's a search. Palatine Georgi Terzo has received an order. Check the rumors. In the hall, pitch, wax, iron. On the floor, a bucket of dark liquid. On the table, a broken glass, knives, herbs. Silence. She stands in a red cloak. She does not hide. She looks, as if at guests who have arrived too early. The clerk takes notes. The priest crosses himself. One soldier says, I saw the body. Another says, No, it's a scarecrow for healing. No one is sure. But the words are already out. Bodies, torture, blood. The interrogations began that same week. Everyone in Chite was summoned, from servants to nobles, from nannies to the parents of the missing girls. Some spoke out of fear, others, so as not to end up on the bench themselves. The royal clerks recorded more than 300 testimonies. Some swore they had seen the bodies, others that they had only heard rumors. The rumor spread throughout Hungary. Noble families demanded punishment. Ordinary people demanded justice. When the case was transferred to the royal court, Terzo already knew that she would not be executed. The name Bathory was too famous. So the sentence was changed, not the sword, but the walls. It is documented that the arrest took place at the end of 1610. The actions were led by Palatine Georgi Terzo. Bathory was locked up in her own castle without a public trial. Historians debate the number of victims and the nature of the findings in Sejd. The sources are contradictory. Some of the evidence was obtained under torture. In the morning, there was a siege and the servants were arrested. 2 were tortured. 3 days later, they would say everything that was needed for a beautiful trial. No one would write down that the words were extracted with iron and hunger. The sentence would be lenient, no execution, so as not to disgrace the family. Wall her up, a small window for bread and water. Silence, as the ultimate instrument of punishment. They say there was a mirror there. They say she talked to it until morning. You say I drank blood, but it was the world that drank mine. 1611. The servants at the trial say everything they want to hear. Testimony under torture is also part of the legend. After her death, it became too quiet in Chait. The servants disappeared, the relatives left, and the castle doors were sealed. The legend lives faster than the documents. Elizabeth Bathory was arrested at the end of 1610. She was not tried. In 1611, several of her servants were executed in Pressburg after testimony obtained under torture. She died in 1614 in a walled-up room. The place of her burial remains unknown. A decade later, monks were already writing, "The devil had a daughter in her." Portraits disappeared, and amulets were sold in markets. The 18th century invented theatrical plots, and the 19th century invented Countess Dracula. When women began to demand education and property, she was raised from the grave as a warning. A few centuries later, her name would appear not in court records, but in the Guinness Book of World Records. There it would be written, "The most cruel woman in history, 650 killed." But this figure is only a shadow of a single testimony, extracted under torture. No notebook with names has been found. History has left behind not a tally of victims, but a tally of fears that society has turned into a myth. Modern historians are returning to the case. There is no evidence of hundreds of victims, but there are deaths, political conflicts, and confiscations. The story of blood turns out to be a story of power. Every time we say her name, it is not so much the woman who comes to life as the era that created her. The beginning of the 17th century, the Renaissance is dying out, the hunt for witches is in full swing. Fear is more convenient than doubt. Moralists rewrite her life. A little truth, a little convenience, a little morality. The formula for the legend is simple: beauty, blood, punishment. In the 18th century, the stage. In the 19th, novels. In the 20th, cinema. History is carved out of history, leaving an effect. Later legends link her with another name, Vlad Three Teeps, the one the world knows as Count Dracula. They were never connected by life or blood, only by shared land and shared reputation. But that was enough for the myth. Transylvania got its king of cruelty and its queen of blood. The Real Elizabeth read Latin, ruled, wrote to the emperor. She gave birth to children. She lived stubbornly. It was difficult to control her, so it had to be explained. It was easier to call her a monster than to acknowledge her independence. The 18th century turned her into a theatrical heroine. Moral panic sells tickets better than facts. Time erases names, but not mirrors. In museums, her reflection. In the archives of Bratislava, letters with a seal, a firm hand, financial reports. No magic, logic, discipline. But who buys legends without blood? The 19th century searches for vampires and finds not documents, but fear. Each era sees itself in her. The Victorians, the sin of the flesh; the modernists, obsession with beauty; cinema, eternal youth. Perhaps that is why Bathory's story lives on as a mirror. Monsters allow us not to see our own fears. In the 17th century, people feared women in power. In the 21st century, they fear women who age openly. The essence has not changed. 1729. London's Tragica Historia describes blood baths for the first time. Sometimes it seems that she is still there, not in the castle, but in memory. The unanswered question remains the same. Why can't a woman age without fear? Once upon a time, it was a witch who bathed in blood. Now, it's anti-aging creams. Then, it was punishment by morality. Now, it's public humiliation in posts and comments. The mechanism is the same. The body is the arena. Fear is the currency. Control is the weapon. She went too far. This phrase was heard 400 years ago. It is still heard today. The world first praises youth, then punishes attempts to preserve it. The mirror remains a witness. And every time it shows us, ourselves. The 21st century. The same mechanisms, only without torches. They say that at the end of her life, she fell silent. She did not break. She understood. The myth lives without permission. Silence became the last gesture of control. Several items were found in her walled-up room. A darkened mirror, fragments of a glass, an old book with Latin notes. Between the pages, Omnia tempus devorat, time devours everything. Next to it, in a trembling hand, but not memory. Memory proved stronger than time. When we say her name, we bring back not a monster. The story of a woman who frightened a world that had learned to invent witches instead of acknowledging its own injustice. They say that years of solitude drove her mad. Others say that she simply fell silent for good, tired of talking to the walls. When a maid looked into the window in August 1614, the Countess was no longer breathing. The official reports say nothing about the cause. Only briefly, found dead in her cell. Thus ended a story that the world would later rewrite hundreds of times. Her castle still stands. Tourists photograph the ruins, guides whisper about bathing in blood. Almost no one mentions that this was a woman who independently ruled the lands, made decisions, and presided over courts. Because that's not so scary. That's power. Perhaps one day we will learn to see her in this way. Not as a shadow in the mirror, but as a reflection of an era that feared women with their own rules. So the next time someone says, she bathed in blood, just reply, no, she bathed in the fear of her time. The legend is loud. The documents are silent. But sometimes it is silence that speaks the truth.